There are few things more frustrating than watching a terrific movie that gets just one specific element wrong, such that it ultimately sours the entire experience, downgrading a potentially great movie to merely a good one. And while a good movie is certainly nothing to sniff at, when a film gets this close to genuine greatness only to fumble the ball in one distinct way, it's simply natural for it to leave viewers absolutely infuriated. These movies trip themselves up in a number of baffling ways, be it serving up an overextended finale, refusing to commit to their bolder ideas, or simply chasing the gravy train of franchise filmmaking. In each case, integrity and dramatic satisfaction were clearly within reach, but the writers, directors, and producers opted to go in another direction entirely. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with Whatculture, here with 9 good movies that could have been great with one simple fix. Number 9. Cuts the epilogue, AI Artificial Intelligence. AI Artificial Intelligence might be the most underrated film in Steven Spielberg's entire filmography, a sumptuous and incredibly ambitious sci-fi epic originally conceived by Stanley Kubrick but handed off to Spielberg a few years prior to his death in 1999. The result appears to be a fascinating collision of two distinct directorial styles, Kubrick's detached coolness and Spielberg's slushy, optimistic warmth. The story of Pinocchio is filtered through a sci-fi prism as an android boy, David, yearns to become a real boy in order to win the affection of his human mother, Monica. AI received broadly positive reviews yet underperformed at the box office, and to this day remains a polarizing film amid mainstream audiences. The film's big miscalculation is the wildly unnecessary inclusion of a 25-minute epilogue sequence set 2,000 years in the future. Clearly, AI would have felt dramatically tighter and far less indulgently sentimental had it ended when David ends up trapped in the ocean, wishing to become a real boy, while the ocean eventually freezes along with him. It's hauntingly beautiful, fittingly bleak, and the perfect end for a character doomed to be denied the one thing he wants. Yes, it would be sad, but it would be much better. Number 8. The violence is R-rated, The Hunger Games. The hit young adult sci-fi action flick that kickstarted a hit franchise and established Jennifer Lawrence as a global superstar, in which protagonist Katniss Everdeen finds herself fighting to the death against 23 other tributes in a televised competition at the behest of a dystopian authority. Between the nuanced performances and tight character work, it's certainly the best opening entry into any major young adult franchise to date. The biggest problem of the movie, however, and really the franchise as a whole, is how painfully neutered the violence all feels. Sure, it's not terribly surprising that a movie about children slaughtering one another would struggle under the PG-13 umbrella, and duly director Gary Ross results to rendering much of the action scarcely comprehensible through irritating shaky cam coverage. Obviously, this was a commercial calculation above all else, but given how much more disturbing the bloodletting was in the source material, the film version ends up feeling rather sanitized and lacking in visceral impact. Number 7. The original ending is used, First Blood. Before John Rambo became a poster boy for indiscriminate murder in the second and third Rambo films, the character was introduced in 1982's decidedly more restrained thriller First Blood. The first Rambo is a comparatively quiet and subtle film about the titular Vietnam vet who, upon visiting a small town, finds himself relentlessly harassed by the local police force. Needless to say, it doesn't go well for anyone involved. Between Stallone's shockingly believable and compassionate performance, the riveting action and strong supporting performances, First Blood is a textbook example of efficient genre filmmaking. However, First Blood's unsubtle social commentary about America's treatment of war veterans very nearly concluded with a grimly devastating cherry on top where Rambo dies. But co-writer Sylvester Stallone ultimately opted for a slightly sunnier ending where Rambo is instead taken into custody. To be clear, the film's ultimate ending is no picnic, but it is nevertheless the reason that the Rambo series exists, and that the character is known less for his PTSD-addled state and more for his aptitude for slaughtering hundreds of anonymous goons. The original ending, featuring Rambo's suicide by gunshot, was actually filmed, and what's more, it's actually pretty damn great. Granted, the studio would have lost out on hundreds of millions of dollars if they went this way, but in terms of storytelling integrity, it would have elevated First Blood into the stratosphere. Number 6. Keanu Reeves is recast Bram Stoker's Dracula. Bram Stoker's Dracula is an absurdly handsome adaptation of Bram Stoker's iconic novel, a visually stunning and deeply felt film bolstered by its immaculate production design, cinematography, and practical effects, not to forget Gary Oldman's deliciously intense central performance. It is exactly the sort of freewheeling, lush genre film only the most respected auteurs get to make, and while it's no Godfather, it is one of the most unrestrained and ambitious literary adaptations of the entire 1990s. Unfortunately, there's one constant that pretty much everybody hates about the film, and that's Keanu Reeves' toe-curlingly bad performance as protagonist Jonathan Harker. Now, Reeves does get a lot of unfair flack for being a bad actor, but all that derision is fully earned here with this film, with Reeves' impossibly awful attempt at an English accent rousing uproarious laughter throughout. Now, that's not to say that Winona Ryder's effort is particularly good either, but compared to Reeves, she's passable. Given how many English actors could have taken the part, this was a totally solvable problem, but alas, Columbia Pictures really wanted the on-the-rise Reeves in their movie no matter how awkward a fit he was. Number 5. Newt and Hicks survive Alien 3. There's no denying that David Fincher's Alien 3 is one of the most divisive and argued over entries into any major film franchise. Upon release, it was polarized by critics and fans for a number of reasons, but the main one was a creative decision that made fans skeptical of Alien 3 from the outset. Fan favourite characters Newt and Hicks were given listless off-screen deaths in its opening moments. Ripley fought so hard to keep Newt alive in Aliens, and her bond with both Newt and Hicks was so well established in that film that to throw it all away at the start of this sequel felt like a needless clearing of the table. Now, nobody's saying that Newt and Hicks absolutely needed to appear in Alien 3, but couldn't they have just been taken out of commission instead? It would have ensured that fans weren't immediately pissed off when the movie started, and were more easily able to get on board with Fincher's punk rock vision for the franchise, which despite its rough edges, is so close to greatness. Number 4. King Kong shows up earlier, King Kong. Whether or not you believe Peter Jackson's 2005 King Kong remake to be the definitive interpretation of the story, it's most certainly an impressive realization of a passion project from the filmmaker. Between the first-rate visual effects, talented ensemble cast, and sheer epic sweep, it's a film that, in spite of its successes, endures as a rare remake that truly justifies its own existence. But if there's one thing holding Jackson's film back from being a true classic, it's the absolutely brutal 187-minute runtime. Jackson's not exactly been one for snappy, concise filmmaking over the last few decades, but his King Kong feels particularly bloated, especially during its opening act. It's almost 70 minutes before the titular creature makes his first appearance, and though much of the first hour is loaded with solid character development and world building, Jackson really should have been urged to kill his darlings and unveil Kong in a reasonable time frame. Number 3. Pinbacker is removed from the third act, Sunshine. Danny Boyle's 2007 cult sci-fi thriller follows a team of astronauts venturing on a mission to reignite the dying sun with a gigantic nuclear bomb. Between the gorgeous visuals, especially considering its $40 million budget, the philosophical approach to the material, and a terrific ensemble cast, Sunshine is yet another riveting addition to Boyle's diverse filmography. However, since the film's release, critics and fans alike have called out Sunshine's third act as immensely disappointing, effectively shifting from an existential sci-fi thriller into a more conventional slasher film. Because the looming extinction of the human race apparently isn't enough threat for a movie, the final reel hurls in a stowaway serial killer for the remaining crew members to contend with, and the film devolves into genre schlock nonsense for the majority of its remainder. Had the film simply trained its focus on the mission at hand, it probably would have achieved the classic status it seems so thoroughly destined for during its opening hour. Number 2. End it on the freeze frame, Source Code. Duncan Jones' follow-up to Moon is one of the most creative sci-fi films of recent times. A thriller in which a US Army captain is sent into an 8-minute digital recreation of a real-life train explosion, tasked with figuring out the identity of the terrorist who bombed it. With strong direction and a strong cast, Source Code has rightfully endured as a cult favourite, a killer concept largely done justice. But like so many almost great genre films, Source Code doesn't quite know when to quit, and ultimately ultimately overplays its hand in the final stretch. Gyllenhaal's character eventually learns that his physical body was actually gravely wounded 2 months prior, and his consciousness is in fact being transmitted into the mind of a man, Sean Fentress, in various parallel universes in the hope of discovering the bomber. He finally asks that he be reinserted into the simulation one last time, after which his life support will be switched off, and this time, using all his previously accrued knowledge, he manages to prevent the bomb going off within the 8 minutes. However, when his life support is turned off, his consciousness miraculously endures on its own within the new parallel dimension, serving up a rather sappy feel-good conclusion to a near-tragic story. It's especially frustrating as the film clearly should have ended on the brilliantly affecting freeze frame where Steven's life support is terminated. The train is full of happy people, he gets to kiss his love interest Christina, and locking them all in that perfect moment would have been a compelling, heartbreaking end to the story. Number 1. There's no silly plot twist, Switchblade romance. This grisly French horror flick follows two best friends, Marie and Alex, who spend a weekend at Alex's remote farmhouse, only to find themselves waylaid by a murderous trucker intent on making them his next victims. The film is thick in atmosphere and tension, hence its international title High Tension, serving as one of the most notable entries into the early days of the new French extremity movement. Shot with appropriately grimy cinematography, overflowing with nauseatingly realistic gore, and tenaciously acted, it's a film that for so much of its runtime feels destined for undisputed classic status. But please get rid of that god-awful cinematic plot twist, where it's revealed that the killer was in fact Marie all along, who is murderously deranged and madly in love with Alex. This grossly cheapens the entire film, as it directly contradicts and invalidates much of what the audience has been shown, but it's also a problem that could have been eliminated mostly in editing, with perhaps a day or two of additional reshoots to give the film a more straightforward ending. If you can forgive this creative miscalculation, the first 80% of the movie is one of the finest slasher flicks of the 21st century. And with a simpler ending less privy to plot holes, the entire film could have been held up in the same esteem.